The crowded bank fell silent the moment the manager sneered and tore the check in half. A black man, calm, respectful, holding his mother's old walking stick, stood frozen as the white manager smirked, saying, "We don't cash fake checks here." The crowd chuckled. Cameras recorded. The humiliation burned deep, but what no one knew was that this ordinary man wasn't poor. He was the new owner of the bank, quietly finalizing the deal that very morning. And the man who mocked him, about to lose everything. This story will leave you speechless. It's about racism, justice, and respect. If you believe in equality and karma, hit subscribe, comment justice, and never miss stories that reveal the truth behind every cruel act. It was a bright Monday morning in downtown Chicago. The bank lobby buzzed with chatter, people standing in lines, pens scratching over forms, coins clinking at the counters. Among them stood Marcus Reed, a humble-looking black man in his 40s, wearing a neat brown jacket and faded jeans. In his hands, he held a check for $750,000, a check he'd received after finalizing the sale of a small business he'd built from scratch. He walked to the counter with quiet confidence, smiling politely at the bank manager, Mr. Whitmore, a tall, sharp-suited man with slicked-back hair and an expression of superiority. Marcus explained that he wanted to deposit his check. Mr. Whitmore glanced at him once, then again at the check, and his face twisted into mockery. "Are you sure this isn't stolen?" he said loudly, making nearby customers turn. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Marcus's smile faded, but he remained calm. "It's mine, sir. Everything's verified," he replied. Whitmore leaned back, smirking. "We don't deal with fake checks here. Maybe try a smaller branch next time." Then, in a move so cruel that it made even the tellers gasp, he tore the check in half and dropped it in the trash. Gasps filled the room. Marcus stood still, his hands trembling slightly, but his voice remained steady. "You just made a big mistake." Everyone assumed he was bluffing. But what they didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just a customer. He was the new owner of the bank chain. The deal finalized just hours before, and the man who tore up his check was about to face the most humiliating lesson of his life. The bank lobby fell silent after the sound of the torn paper echoed in the air. The manager, Mr. Whitmore, stood there with a smirk of triumph on his face, dusting his hands as if he'd just rid the world of a nuisance. The other employees looked away, pretending to be busy. No one dared to interfere. The few customers who had witnessed the scene whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads, others chuckling quietly. Marcus took a deep breath, keeping his composure. His eyes lingered on the pieces of his check lying in the trash can, fluttering slightly from the air conditioner's breeze. The humiliation stung, not because of the money, but because of how familiar it all felt. Years of being underestimated, judged, and dismissed because of his skin color had prepared him for this moment. But today, things would be different. Whitmore crossed his arms. "Are you still here? I said we don't serve people like you flashing fake checks." Marcus looked up, his voice calm but firm. "I'll wait for the regional director." Whitmore scoffed. "You'll wait a long time. He doesn't deal with walk-ins." Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he walked over to a chair and sat down quietly, taking out his phone. Within seconds, he sent a message. "I'm here. Proceed with the transition." 10 minutes later, the glass doors of the bank swung open. In walked a group of sharply dressed executives and lawyers. Their polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, and the air seemed to shift. At their center was a woman in her 50s wearing a navy blue suit, the regional director. "Miss Patel." Whitmore straightened his tie nervously. "Good morning, Miss Patel. I wasn't expecting—" She cut him off sharply. "Mr. Whitmore, please step aside. We're here to announce a major ownership change." The manager blinked, confusion washing over his face. He glanced at Marcus, still seated calmly, and then back at the director. "Wait, ownership change?" Miss Patel turned toward the staff and raised her voice. "As of this morning, the new majority shareholder and owner of this bank chain is Mr. Marcus Reed." The room went silent. The tellers froze mid-transaction. Customers turned their heads in shock. and the color drained from Whitmore's face. Marcus stood up slowly, walking toward the counter, where the pieces of his torn check still lay in the trash. He reached in, pulled them out carefully, and placed them on the desk in front of the trembling manager. "You tore this up without a second thought," he said softly. "You didn't see a customer. You saw a stereotype," Whitmore stammered, his voice cracking. "Sir, I didn't know. Please, I was just following protocol." Marcus's voice stayed calm but heavy with meaning. "Protocol doesn't include disrespect. It doesn't include destroying a man's property because of your assumptions. What you did today wasn't about the check. It was about the color of my skin." Tears began to fill the manager's eyes. The crowd was silent, watching a man who once held power now shrink before the truth. Ms. Patel cleared her throat. "Mr. Whitmore, you are hereby suspended pending further investigation. Effective immediately." Whitmore tried to speak, but no words came out. Security escorted him out as he kept glancing back at Marcus. Disbelief etched on his face. Marcus looked around the room, his voice now addressing everyone. "Never forget, the person you look down on today might be the one signing your paycheck tomorrow. Respect isn't a favor. It's a reflection of your own character." The staff clapped quietly, moved not just by the twist of fate, but by the dignity with which Marcus handled his humiliation. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He taught. And as he turned to leave, one of the tellers whispered softly, "That's what real power looks like." Outside, sunlight hit his face as he walked to his car, not with vengeance in his heart, but with the calm satisfaction that justice had finally spoken for itself. The moment the truth came out, the air in the bank turned electric. No one moved. No one even breathed. The arrogant manager, Mr. Whitmore, who had just torn Marcus's check minutes ago, now stood frozen, his mouth open, eyes wide, as though the ground had vanished beneath him. "You own the bank?" he stammered, his voice trembling. Marcus's calm gaze met his. "I don't just own this branch, Mr. Whitmore," he said evenly, his tone heavy with quiet authority. "I own every branch under this name across 3 states. Gasps rippled through the room. The tellers exchanged glances, whispering in disbelief. The customers who had laughed earlier now looked away, shame painting their faces. Whitmore's throat went dry. "Sir, I had no idea." Marcus raised a hand, silencing him. "That's the problem. You never had any idea. You never stopped to think before judging. You looked at me and saw nothing more than the color of my skin. You didn't see a customer. You didn't see a human being. You saw what your prejudice wanted you to see." Whitmore's face flushed red. Please." But Marcus stepped closer. The entire bank watched as the power dynamics shifted entirely. The man who once barked orders now shook under the weight of his own arrogance. "You think tearing a piece of paper made you powerful?" Marcus said, his voice calm but razor-sharp. "You thought belittling me made you superior? Let me tell you something, Mr. Whitmore. Real power is silent. It doesn't need to humiliate others to prove itself." The silence was deafening. Ms. Patel, the regional director, finally spoke. "Mr. Whitmore, your actions today violated every principle of our code of conduct. You racially profiled a client, destroyed his property, and publicly humiliated him. You will be reported, effective immediately." Whitmore's knees seemed to buckle. Please, I've worked here for 20 years." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. His expression softened slightly, not out of pity but out of strength. "Then you should have learned something in 20 years, he said. "You should have learned how to treat people right." Whitmore collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. The man who once controlled others now sat powerless, consumed by his own shame. Marcus turned toward the crowd. "To everyone who stood by and said nothing," he said, his voice echoing through the marble halls, "remember this moment. Silence in the face of injustice makes you part of it." One young teller began to cry quietly behind the counter. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I saw what he did and I didn't stop him." Marcus gave her a small nod. "Then learn from it," he said. "Use your voice next time. That's how change begins." He turned to Ms. Patel. "I want this branch to undergo complete staff retraining, not about banking, but about humanity. about equality, about dignity. Miss Patel nodded firmly. "It will be done, sir." As Marcus walked toward the exit, every eye followed him. Some out of awe, some out of guilt, but all out of respect. At the door, he paused. The same security guard who had smirked earlier now stood with his head bowed. Marcus looked at him and said quietly, "You don't have to kneel to respect someone. You just have to open your eyes." Outside, the world seemed brighter. The city noise felt distant. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of generations behind him. Those who had endured, those who had suffered, and those who had never been given the chance to speak. He took out his phone and called his mother. "Hey, Mama," he said softly, a smile breaking through his calm. "You were right. Kindness is power. I just proved it today." Tears welled up in his eyes, but this time, they weren't from pain. They were from pride, from triumph, from knowing he'd turned years of prejudice into a moment of truth. The world wouldn't forget. And as he walked away from the bank, whispers followed him, not of mockery, but of admiration, because in that single unforgettable moment, a man who had been dismissed for his color reminded everyone that character is what defines power, not skin. The bank was silent, eerily silent. Every employee's eyes followed Mr. Carter as he stood tall in the center of the lobby, his calm voice cutting through the thick air. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, turning toward the trembling manager, "I came here today as a customer, not as your superior. I wanted to see how people like you treat others when you think they have no power." Reynolds' lips quivered. "Say, sir, I didn't know. I thought—" Mr. Carter raised a hand to stop him. "You thought you could judge a man by his skin, by his clothes, by his tone of voice. You burned my check to humiliate me. But what you didn't realize was that this entire building belongs to me." The crowd gasped softly. One of the tellers whispered to another, "He owns the bank?" "Yes," another said. "He's the CEO of the entire chain." Mr. Carter took a deep breath and turned to the rest of the employees. "When I bought this bank 5 years ago, I wanted it to be a place of fairness and opportunity, a place where everyone, no matter their color, accent, or background, was treated with dignity. Today, I've seen how far we still have to go." He gestured toward the front door. "Reynolds, hand in your ID. Security will escort you out. You're done here." The manager's face turned pale. He tried to plead, "Sir, please. It was a mistake. Don't ruin my career." Mr. Carter looked him directly in the eye. "You ruined your own career the moment you forgot your humanity." As the guards led Reynolds away, the rest of the staff stood frozen, shocked, ashamed, but also inspired. Mr. Carter walked over to the counter where his check had been burned. He picked up the half-burnt remains and held them up. "This," he said softly, "isn't just paper. It's a test of character, and today some of you failed that test." He paused for a moment, his voice becoming gentler. "But for those who watched, who stayed silent, I hope this teaches you something. Real power isn't in money or status. It's in how you treat people when you think no one is watching." A young teller, visibly moved, stepped forward and said, "Sir, I'm sorry. I should have spoken up." Mr. Carter nodded kindly. "And now you will. Because next time you see something wrong, you'll remember this moment." He looked around the bank one last time, then turned toward the door. Cameras from outside were already flashing. Word had spread. Reporters gathered as he stepped onto the sidewalk, his voice firm yet calm as he spoke to the press. No one, no matter how rich or poor, deserves to be humiliated for who they are. Today wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. The reporters scribbled his words furiously. A few days later, news outlets across the country carried the story. Bank owner teaches racist manager a lesson in humanity. The video from the bank's security cameras went viral. People around the world praised Mr. Carter's dignity and calm strength. He didn't yell. He didn't fight back with hate. He simply showed the truth. Weeks later, that same branch became a symbol of change. Mr. Carter launched a new diversity training program, ensuring no one else would face what he faced that day. And every morning, as customers walked into the bank, they saw a small plaque near the door engraved with his words, Power means nothing if it's not used with kindness. That line became a reminder, not just for the employees, but for everyone who walked through those doors.